speak and share some of my experiences with Gabe, and I'll pass the baton over to Al now so he can introduce himself to everybody. Al, take it away.
Thanks, Jesse. I appreciate it. I have learned a few things over the years, and people who weigh 100 pounds, they don't attend weight loss groups, meaning we're all here because we have something in common. We speak the same language. The topic of suicide hits home for a lot of us. It is such an emotionally charged word. And for me, I was sharing this with Jesse earlier. The challenge is this. I'm somebody who's very up, 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 go, go, go. And in a presentation like this, where the focal point is suicide, it's a delicate dance because in no way, we talked about this together, Jesse, like we don't want to come across as disrespectful, but we also don't want it to be something that is so, intense. And I think that, Jesse, I really appreciate you because I think that we're cut from the same cloth. We think the same way. We always say those who are going to show up are the ones who need to show up. So for all of you, I have such respect and gratitude that you've taken the time to join us to talk about something that not a lot of people are willing to talk about. And I want to start by sharing two pictures that are pretty symbolic for me. And this first picture is peppered with all kinds of metaphors, really, because this is my best friend. Jesse alluded to Gabe. This is Justin, who died by suicide. And the picture strikes me for this reason. Justin was someone who was always the life of the party. He was always seen with a smile on his face. He got into yoga, meditation. You have a picture like this where he seems like he's at complete peace. Yes.
Oops, Al, you got muted. That was my fault. That was my fault.
No worries. After this loss, after Justin's passing, like you, Jesse, I had to really step back and ask some questions about life. Like, what is this? And the thing that I started to ponder is how well do I really know the people around me? Because yes, I knew that Justin was struggling, but I think that I wanted to live in that world of denial. It's a more comfortable place to be. And sometimes I just wanted to ignore that intuition, the guts, even though I knew what was happening, I didn't want to accept it. And the other picture, I guess, that really stands out for me, my wedding day. It's fitting, it's appropriate that Justin Andres was my best man because we had the same journey. We both struggled with mental illness. We both struggled with addictions. And the sad thing, it was almost a year to the day after the wedding that I got the call that changed my life. And I think that we can all relate to this to some degree, yes? Where when that phone rings and you answer and whatever that message is, it sends you down a completely different path. Cheryl, you shared that your nephew, I believe it was your nephew, yes, died by suicide. And so we have all these events. And I had so many questions. And for me, what it felt like after I got the call was poof, 1,000-piece puzzle. 1,000-piece puzzle just got thrown on the ground. But the problem is that 500 of those pieces were gone. And I'm left sitting there and I'm trying to figure out how do I put this back together? How do I make sense of this? Why? It's the head on the swivel. And the process of grief is unique to all of us. Now, as I was saying, the process of grief is unique because, yes, we all experience loss, but when the loss comes in the form of suicide, it is a little bit different, isn't it? And for me, the path to healing was challenging. What I always thought that healing looked like was more this, linear, you just heal. Oh, then I realized, it's more like this. It is very much the highs and the lows, especially when it came to suicide. For me, the questions didn't stop. There were a lot of sleepless nights, and I simply became consumed with this loss, where I was always renting out so much headspace. And it started to really take away from my ability to enjoy life. And so I had to do something. And on the 1-year anniversary after Justin's passing, what I did is I made the trip out to Justin's grave. And right before I left home, my wife, Tanya, she looks at me and she says, hang on, Al, before you go, before you walk out that door, I have a present for you. I made something for you. So I remember turning around, I walked down the stairs and Tanya hands me this gift bag. It's pretty large. And in this gift bag, I pull out a picture frame. And in this picture frame, it's full of all these beautiful pictures of Justin and I, all these beautiful, precious memories. And, of course, I broke. I took this picture frame with me and I sat by his grave and I put it upright because I just wanted to reflect. And immediately it slammed down. And so I carefully put it up again, slams down. It's not even windy. And the third time that I carefully put this picture frame up and it slams down, now I'm mad. And I stood up and I opened my arms and I said, what's going on? And the kicker is I got an answer. This was so clear. And the one word that I heard was enough. Enough. And I immediately knew what that meant. For me, it meant enough, Al. You spend so much time, so much energy thinking about maybe what you could have done, what you should have done, that what happened is you missed out on the journey that you were meant to lead in the first place. That was a catalyst for me to no longer be consumed. Does the pain go away? No, of course not. It's something that we never get over. We have to go through. And it all started to make sense because I remember speaking to an elder who I respect at the college that I was teaching at. And when I initially said to her, why him? Why have I always been saved? Why are other people saved? And why was he not? The elder's words were perfect. And she looked at me and she said, Al, you have no right to ask that question because he has his journey and you have yours. And I realized sometimes we just have to surrender. Sometimes we just have to look at what we can control and completely let go of the rest. So even moving forward, it's learning to say and do everything in those moments so that we don't have to look back thinking, should have done more, but ultimately understanding that we each come into this world with our own journey and trying to respect that journey. And we know that when it comes to suicide, roughly 90% of those individuals struggle with mental illness. And therefore, I would say that this word of choice gets blurred because we don't think clearly. But at the end of the day, it's surrendering to that journey. And that has helped me immensely through my own grieving process. Jesse, I know you want to share a bit about your good friend, Gabe. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Al. I every time I hear your story or I get to share space with you, it is such an honor to do so. And I feel like every time I'm able to take something new in and really download it. And I've heard you share your story of Justin a couple times now. And each time I hear you share it, I feel like not only am I learning from you, but I'm learning from Justin as well. So thank you for sharing your experience and thank you for sharing a little bit of Justin with us today. My Justin was Gabe, and Gabe was one of those guys that we used to, him and I would call each other, he was Maverick and I was Iceman after the characters in Top Gun. And I remember one time a little bit before he had passed, there was a group of people playing volleyball over on the beach, and I had pulled up a little bit late. I made sure I had the soundtrack of Top Gun queued up, and right when I pulled up that I had the windows down, blaring, playing with the boys, that Kenny Loggins soundtrack with a slow motion high five. So I, of course, jumped out of the car. He heard it, ran over to me, and we did the full slow motion high five. And the thing that was really remarkable about Gabe and what I learned from him so much was how important it is to love on your people when you have the chance to. When Gabe passed, I was in my mid-20s. I met him when I was in my early 20s. And for guys, we weren't supposed to hug. You're supposed to handshake, maybe do the bro hug. And I remember one time Gabe worked as a personal trainer, And he also had a part-time job at a local bar. And this bar is a pretty popular place for tourists. I went to see him, and the bar, the way it was set up is it was, kind of a square bar, but to get in and out of the bar, you had to go down underneath the entrance, and you had to basically crawl in and out. So it was very cumbersome and not an easy exit for people behind the bar to get to. Likely designed to keep the employees focused on doing what they're supposed to do, serving food and drinks to the patrons. And I remember walking in one day, extremely crowded, extremely busy. And Gabe saw me. He paused what he was doing. He had probably 4 or 5 people waiting to get an order put in with him. He got down his hands and knees, crawled out from underneath the bar, and came over and gave me a hug. Not a bro hug, but a real hug. Arms are wrapped around, patted me on the back, and just said, "Good to see you, man." On June 15th, 2009, I got a text message from him that said, "I love you all." And it was one of those moments that I think, as Al said a little bit ago, you stop. Something is off, something's about to change. And it was such a weird juxtaposition because there was a part of me that viscerally knew something very, very bad was happening. But there was this other part of me that wanted to deny what was going on. And so I actually had this inner wrestling match happening about, do I get up and go, but then trying to convince myself I should stay. And the voice of convincing was, well, what if you're making a big scene out of this? You don't want to overreact. You don't want to scare people. You don't want to alert people. You're going to look like an idiot if this is nothing. You don't want to embarrass him. You don't want to embarrass yourself. And I remember at one point, I actually sat down prepared to convince myself that nothing was happening. And luckily, there was that inner wisdom that really spoke and said, "Jesse, something's going on. If you don't go, you will regret it for the rest of your life." So I went looking for Gabe and eventually got to him. And what transpired after that, after piecing things together afterwards, I found that Gabe had kind of planned for me to be the one to find him. I think that he chose that because he felt like I'd be the one that'd be able to handle it and also kind of help navigate other people through it. But we went through the whole process of calling 911, trying to keep him alive, performing CPR, everything, only to find out several hours later that my friend Gabe was brain dead. I remember about 2 days later going and meeting up with a friend. And this friend, her name is Melanie. She looked at me when I was approaching her. She had tears in her eyes. And we hugged. And we hugged for a minute. We both cried. And then we stopped. We were holding each other, looking at each other. And I remember her looking up at me because I'm about 6'4". So I'm always taller than in the group. And she looks up at me and she says to me, "Jesse, I want so badly to help you right now, but I don't know what to say or do." And that was something that I really struggled with afterwards because I felt like so many people didn't know what to say or do. Loss is a messy business to begin with. It's often our words fail us, our emotions fail us. We don't know how we're supposed to approach, and every single person is different. Every situation is different because we all have different relationships with the different people in our lives. It may have been that the other day we got in an argument with somebody and then car crash, and we didn't even know that was going to happen because we thought we were going to have the next day to apologize or make up. When you go through a suicide, I think it's even more complicated because there's so many stigmas around it, right? And there's so much misinterpretation and misinformation about it. And everybody has their own unique belief systems about it, which makes it more. And then oftentimes there's that innate human curiosity where we want to know why. Why did they do this? What did they do? What happened? And Melanie's question, it kind of precipitated in my mind for some time. And even more so, I wanted to find out an answer that I would be able to offer to people. What do we do when someone's world has turned upside down? What are the answers that we can provide people? How can we help guide people to be able to be with each other? And there's a few things I've learned from this whole healing journey that really were inspired by Gabe, but I learned a few months later when I went to this relief trip in Haiti. So shortly after Gabe passed away, the earthquake in Haiti happened in 2010, that big, huge earthquake that was kind of destroyed that whole world. And at the time, Haiti was one of the poorest, if not the poorest nations in the world. I was so desperate to try to escape the images I had seen on that day and the emotion I was feeling with, and still trying to find the answers to Melanie's question about how does someone help me? How do I help other people? And I remember that first day in Haiti, we were out in this middle field, and I'd gone there as part of this disaster relief group. And there was a bus that pulled up. And this bus had taken about 12 hours to get from Port-au-Prince, the capital of Haiti, to where we were. In the best of circumstances, that trip should have taken about an hour. But because the roads were so destroyed, because the whole system was in such chaos, it took about 12. The bus was overcrowded. And as the people began to come off the bus, most of whom had to be helped off, these folks were all sorts of mangled and messed up. I remember one person had a Band-Aid over half their face with their eye covered. Another person had lost a finger. Another person's leg was completely casted. People were still bleeding profusely from their injuries. Many of the people did not know if their loved ones were alive. Many of them had lost loved ones. And if they had any sort of possessions they had been able to salvage, they were carrying at best a half-full hefty bag. Poorest country in the world had their possessions reduced down to maybe a hefty bag full of stuff. Many of them still unknowing if their loved ones had survived. So I'm witnessing this whole thing, right? And all of us, like Al said, usually the types of folks who show up to something like this, we've gone through it. We have some sort of intimate experience with it. And so you all know that it's a really interesting juxtaposition with suicide, where there's a part of you that's still so immersed in that world and trying to make sense of what happened, but there's this other part of you that's trying to go on and reconform with society, trying to fit in. And so it's like part of you's here, but part of you's here. And I felt very much like with me, part of me was here in Haiti, but part of me was still back here with Gabe. And I was walking through this field one night. It's probably about 9:45 at night. And I was really kind of in my own space about life and Gabe and how much my life had changed because of it. And I heard a noise that stopped me in my tracks. I looked over and there was this small bonfire in the middle of the field and out in the middle of Haiti. And there's about 15 or 20 Haitians in a circle around this fire. Most of them could not stand because they have their injuries from the earthquake. And so they're lying down in hospital beds. The ones who could stand were, the ones that could sit were. And these people were laughing, singing, celebrating, and clapping. And I stopped and watched and I observed them and I realized what they were celebrating was the simple fact of being alive. They're celebrating the simple fact that they were able to draw breath in their lungs. They weren't celebrating the stuff. They weren't celebrating anything else. Because I was, why are they celebrating? They've just gone through this horribly traumatic thing. They had gone back to the most basic part of humanity. And it occurred to me then as I watched this with tears going down that there's really a few fundamental things that go into healing from loss. It's number one, it's gratitude. It's doing what the Haitians were doing. It's starting to build our next chapter of life on a foundation of gratitude. That's not dismissing what had happened. It's acknowledging what happened, but also being present to the gifts and blessings that are still in our life. It's number two, it's realizing that while life had happened and we may have lost that person, that us who are here, I think we've been given this very unique responsibility as the custodians of one's legacy. I am of a firm believer that how we choose to live after someone we love is gone is ultimately how we choose to honor them. And how we choose to honor them is ultimately going to be the legacy that they have in our life. And if every time I thought of Gabe, I immediately went to sadness and despair, which I was doing, it's the exact opposite of what you want. You look at his smiling face here. That guy wouldn't want me to be sad when I think of him. He'd want me to be happy. He'd want me to hug. He'd want me to love. He'd want me to rejoice. He'd want me to smile at the funny things we did. Remember how he lived, not how he died. Remember who he was, not where he was when he took his life. So it's really that unique honor that's been bestowed upon all of us, the honor of living in such a way that honors those who lost, the honor of being the custodians of their legacy. And it's number three, it's really connecting to love. It is so easy to almost be seduced down those dark paths of grief and despair, to acknowledge and feel those emotions, but then allow those emotions to lure us into them becoming our identity. The truth is that grief is grief, love is love. And just the same as when I was on one part of the country and Gabe was on another, I could still love him. And even though my friend may not physically still be here, I know he lives on in the love I have for him. He lives on not in the grief, not in the sadness, not the despair. And that's part of where I come and am able to do this. And Al and I were talking before about, setting the space and being upbeat and not wanting to just be, so melancholy when we have these conversations. Truth is I love this guy so much, and I still love him so much. And it is because of him that I can be here with you all. It's because of him I can have this open heart with Al and have these kinds of conversations and share with you, because I love him so dearly. And I believe in my belief system, it's not just me talking and sharing, but it's Gabe sharing with you, sharing with me. It's the love that I'm still able to connect with, to come connect with him, that's able to be a part of this whole experience. And I just feel so blessed to have had him in my life physically. And I feel so grateful to still allow him to be a part of my life today, to be able to share a little bit of him with you. And my hope is that maybe you all see a little bit of Gabe and those that you've lost, or maybe you can learn a little bit of Gabe about how you relate to the losses of the folks that you've lost. So thank you for letting me share some of the Gabe with you. And I'm going to stop sharing the screen and pass it over to my good buddy Al here.
Thanks, Jesse. You hit so many key points and they really resonate. I'm actually feeling a little anxious because last time you changed it over to me, then that Mario guy showed up with the music blaring. So part of me is like, oh,
I'm screening for Mario right now. I am actively screening for Mario. Okay, so just so everybody knows, there's a Carlton wanting to come in.
Okay, roll the dice, Jesse. Let Carlton in.
Ready?
Cross your fingers, everyone.
Cross your fingers, take a breath. Here we go.
I feel pretty good about Carlton. Carlton, welcome. Okay, Jesse, one of the things that you touched on was love. And I love that you also talked about the need to honor those that we've lost. Now, I don't share this with a lot of people. I am a pretty private person. Justin left me a suicide note, and it's very hard to explain moments like that, but there's two things that stood out. The first one, Justin said, all that we have is love. Love is the most important thing that we have in this world. And the second one is, he said, forgiveness. Love and forgiveness are the two most important things. And I have carried that with me. Our loved ones are still here. I mean, I actually, in some way, feel closer to Justin now that he's passed than when he was here. Our spiritual beliefs help guide us in our healing, and I have found a unique connection that is very important to me. I've also had the opportunity to do a few public events with Justin's parents. These are Justin's parents, Ed and Janet Andres. Last night, I actually had Ed on my podcast on men and mental health. Ed's story is also featured in one of my books on men and mental health. And I cried the whole way there because these conversations are hard, but they're also healing. I've learned that silence is not the answer, because there are a lot of people, when they lose loved ones or when they're struggling with their own challenges, there's the fear of what will people think. Stigma still prevents us from potentially reaching out. And when I speak with Ed and Janet, what I love is this. Ever since Justin died, they said, we will not be quiet. They were in a very small Saskatchewan community, and they weren't sure how the church would respond, how the people would respond. And regardless, they said, we will talk about Justin. We will say that this was a death by suicide. And they have now become incredible advocates to, as you said, Jesse, to honor Justin. And one of the things that I find, especially for parents, when you lose a child, And I don't want to talk for a long time because I know, Jesse, we want to make sure that we address any questions and needs and conversation with all of you who have chosen to be here with us. But blame is something that sometimes happens after suicide or after loss. You know, how could you, whatever. I just want to share this one piece that I pulled from Ed and Janet, because here's what they said. I'm just going to blow this up if you can see it. Ed says, I've blamed myself many times for not taking Justin for help. However, Janet and I decided right away that we were not going to place blame on anyone else. Too many marriages have ended this way after losing a child, and we agreed that it would not happen to us. And the one thing that they did and continue to do is open and honest communication, check-ins. How are you doing? It took me a long time to understand that, oh, wait, what? The act of feeling is what leads to healing. And I'm somebody who do not make me feel. I mean, when I was struggling with my mental illness and addictions and people are trying to help me, there's a part of me that truly wanted help. And there's another part that's get away from me because I don't want to look at some of this. But the blame piece is not effective. You know, I've learned the importance of slowing down, going within, feeling, finding my voice. And I want to share one of the brief stories of the men that I interviewed not too long ago. Then I'm going to turn it over to you, Jesse, and hopefully we'll take some questions. Because I really feel like we as a society collectively are moving the right way. Yes, there's lots of work to be done when it comes to mental health, but there is so much going on that is positive. And one of the men that I interviewed, this is Eric Harder. And when he was 17 years old, he was done. He wrote his suicide note. He took a handful of pills. He ate a whole bunch of bread. 18 hours later, he wakes up in a bit of pain, but he's still alive. 20 years pass before he ever tells anyone about that day because there was so much shame, so much embarrassment. He was so hesitant, reluctant to reach out for help. When he finally was able to reach out for help, when he was finally able to give himself permission to be vulnerable, well, here's what he said. He says, I had to learn how to unclench my fists and reach out for help with my fingers fully extended. Once I was brave enough to reach out, I found more hands reaching back than I could ever have imagined. And that is what I have experienced over the last 10 years. Since Justin's passing, I see this beautiful, I don't really like the word shift, but more and more people are starting to give themselves permission to be vulnerable. We're here tonight because we have lived experiences and we're willing to share them with each other. And there's nothing more powerful, and I would argue there's nothing more sacred than someone's story. So like you said so eloquently, Jesse, we're holding space. You know, we are able to have these conversations and move forward. And more individuals are starting to realize that I don't have to live in this silent pain anymore. And when they have the courage to reach out for help, it is liberation. It is freedom. They say they no longer have to wear the proverbial mask. I'm free. I get that. I get that. And often what happens is what we think is going to happen when we reach out for help. It doesn't happen. In case in point, you have Eric Harder, who is met with compassion, not judgment, and dare I say love. You know, and for me, a word like love was very, very hard. Other than Justin, he was the only person who I hugged and I said, I love you too. And on that last day that I saw him, he hugged me a little longer when he said, I love you. And there's a piece of me that knew, but there was a bigger piece that didn't want to accept. But together, yes, it's such a twisted sense of gratitude that I stand here. You know, I question why it is that I'm here and he's not still. And yet that does not serve me. We are all here because we have unfinished business. Yes, that makes sense to me. So with the time that I've been given, I'm going to do the best I can. I'm going to give myself permission to feel, to walk through it, to have the difficult conversations. And to you, Jesse, to everyone who's taken the time to be part of this, mad respect. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Al. I think you're just an incredible human being, and I think you honor Justin so beautifully. with how you show up and who you are as a human.
man.
We'll open it up too. We want to be able to let you all share and asking questions of us. So this is really a time where we can have a discussion. You can share if you want. If there's questions you have of either Al or myself or both of us, feel free to unmute yourself, or you can type it in the chat box, whatever it is. But this is a time for us to really serve and support you. You can ask a question for yourself personally, or maybe you have a loved one that is struggling with suicide, or maybe you have a friend who has a friend who's going through a hard and difficult time, and you just want some guidance on how you might support them. But please feel free to open up the discussion.
Can I go?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So I would like to know, I've also had somebody in my life in the past in 2009 that did commit suicide. And when I was hearing your story, I completely get it. Now I have a different situation where somebody close to me did mention suicide. So how do you prevent suicide from happening? How do you help the person when that person does not necessarily want help from me? Like, it's hard, it's really tough. So how to do it so it doesn't get past?
Go ahead, Jesse.
I will remute myself.
Linda, thank you for asking and sharing. I'll start with this because I'm actually going through something similar right now. And it is with someone who I love and care about very deeply. And I have been asking myself the same question that you just asked. And my answer is, I don't know. I wish I had the magic formula, the magic words, all of those things to be able to prevent something that I want to prevent. It is the thing that keeps me up at night. It is the thing that breaks my heart more than anything. I have made my entire life, my entire reason for being about helping people. And the harsh and cold truth about reality sometimes is that the people that we want to help the most are sometimes the most resistant to being helped. So I just want to start with that and preface that, because I think that's important to acknowledge. But that being said, I think there are some things that we can do for both ourselves and for them. I think number one, it always starts with love, but number two, it always starts with boundaries for ourselves. We can love unconditionally, but that unconditional love that we extend to others has to be extended to self first. Because how we are not going to be helpful is we're not going to be helpful by overextending ourselves and losing ourselves in the process of it. Because then not only are we not helping that person, we're actually adding to their narrative of the guilt and shame that's probably fueling it, right? Oftentimes, I think people who are in that space, they're in that space for whatever reason and whatever story or stories that are fueling it. And sometimes they're looking for evidence, I think, to even validate those stories even more so. And what better evidence could there be than the people that they love and care about the most now suffering because of them? So I think it's extremely important that you establish some boundaries for yourself about looking at what are you, and being honest. What am I really capable of giving and doing and showing up for this person? And what is the part of myself I need to protect and honor and serve for myself? Or knowing that if it affects you, what is the self-care routine that you're going to implement for yourself right afterwards? Whether that's calling and talking to a friend, it's going to go exercise, it's doing a warm bubble bath with candles, something like that. It is still so critical to say that when we're being of service of others, we have to slow down and be of service of self. And the last piece I would say to that too is I think sometimes folks who are in that space, they feel so judged, they feel like failures, they feel like everything they do turns to mud, and that life is really so impossible and challenging. And so if you're able to, if they're willing to listen to you, or if they're willing to speak to you and share, and you're allowing your ear to be lended, hold the space free from judgment. That person's already judging themselves harsher than any of us will ever judge them or our society will. The last thing they need to be is be told all the reasons why the way they're thinking is crazy or ludicrous. I remember sitting in a workshop one time, and there was a psychologist that said they had a high success rate with dealing with a certain kind of patient. I can't remember what the patient was, but it's a patient that's typically classified as crazy, by society. And they said, they're the easiest ones to deal with. And somebody asked why, and they said, well, somebody who people call crazy, part of the reason they seem that way is because they've been told their whole life they're crazy. And they said, all I do is say, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And as soon as that happens, they say, what, really? You believe me? And they say, yeah, absolutely. Tell me more. And the point of sharing that is, and so that ends up becoming this personal, beautiful dialogue. And a lot of the shackles that they have to those narratives start to fade away. So when we have people who are willing to bend our ear and are willing to engage, it's important not to judge, because they're always going to be the harshest judges and critics of themselves. But it's important to listen and not to try to necessarily teach them or tell them how their thinking is nuts or off, or how untrue that is. That doesn't not necessarily what they need to hear. It's more than anything, I think it's just telling them how much you care. How much you care, that you're willing to hold space no matter how dark they are, no matter how hard it is, that you are going to love them no matter what. And we have to, I think that's where the part of the piece is just us trusting in that love, that will be a light, and hoping that that light helps guide them to a place of a greater experience of self. And I hope that's helpful. And then I'll pass it over to Al to throw his 2 cents in there too.
I may have 3 cents on this one.
Well, we're in for a treat.
I appreciate you asking the question, Jesse. Beautiful response, great insights. Thank you for sharing that. I totally agree. These are such emotionally charged situations. Let's collectively agree that silence obviously isn't the answer. And I think that this is the takeaway for me. Ask the tough question. Before Justin's death, there is no way that I would go up to somebody that I love and say, are you feeling suicidal? That is a question that does not come off the tongue nicely. I feel as though actually we're often afraid to ask the question because we fear the response. Yes? Like, what happens if the person that we love actually says yes, because then it's real. And what I've learned is exactly what you said, Jesse. The key piece is listening. Elders always tell us there's a reason that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth. And so if I go back to me, and when I was at that fork in the road where I had many nights where I was ready to check out, the question is, what is it that I needed? Well, I tell you this, for me personally, I did not ever need to be fixed. I wanted to be seen. I wanted to be heard. I wanted to be supported. Now, in my mind, I always thought, oh, nobody will get it. There's nobody out there that cares about me. That's part of the convoluted piece that comes with mental illness. There was a whole lineup of people who would have listened. So there's an onus on that individual that they have to do something and not have that victim mentality like I did for a long time. Now, on the other end, it's saying what I need to say so that I can have an element of peace, that I can clean my proverbial doorstep. So I leave nothing left unsaid, but it does not continue for me. So it is through simple statements like, hey, just checking in. If you ever need an ear, I'm here. Done. You put a statement like that out there. You just said, first of all, I see you. And now you're saying there's the potential that I'll hear you, but that's up to them. And then you wait. But the key thing, going back to what you said, Jesse, listening, because emotions are energy. Darkness cannot survive in light. It cannot. I still believe the greatest gift we can ever give people is the space where they feel safe enough to get some of this out. When you talk to first responders, police officers, people who go to the calls, to the homes of people who've made a suicide attempt, when they take them to the hospital, if those first responders are willing to just listen, 99% of the time when that individual comes to the hospital, they say this, I think I'm going to be okay now. Why? I believe 100% it's because they got some of that darkness out, which made room for other emotions. So I feel for you, but honestly, and maybe it's cold, I no longer will let myself get lost in their journey. I will not do it. Some people say it's selfish. I say it has to do with self-respect. Love the
Thank you.
question.
Yeah, thank you so much, Linda. Anybody else have questions, comments? Please, this is an open space, so ask away, whatever's on your heart.
Linda, did some of that resonate or fit? Like,
Yes, yes, very much. And I did, when he first mentioned it, I was like, how you felt with Justin's, like, no, 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 I don't want to hear it. And then after that, I thought, oh my gosh, what did I do? So I did seek help myself, like, how do I deal with this? And then the answer was the same as you, like, just talk about it. Do you have a plan? If you feel suicide, what are your plans? How do you think you're going to commit? You're going to do it. Talk about those really difficult questions. And I really like what you said, that I think it's important that they feel seen, heard, and cared for. And this is, I think, the key point for me at this point. And to keep saying, keep going back and say, just checking in with you. Are you okay? I'm here if you need me. It's like, not leave it at one time in the beginning, but keep going back to ask him the same question, because we don't know.
yeah. Thanks,
Yeah.
Linda.
Thank you so much. Thank you, both of you. It's very helpful.
You're welcome. Are there any other questions, comments, things that anyone needs to get off of their hearts or just share?
If not, I'm going to invite Mario back in for another dance break.
Mario.
That was a
No
crazy
more
one.
Mario.
That was pretty funny.
That was funny.
It was one of those things where, like you said, it took a minute to say, all right, was that like a planned, like, cartoon kind of break the mood, or what do we got going on here? But anyway.
Of all the Zooms I've Zoomed this last year and a half, I've never had somebody Zoom in that way. I've heard of those things, but I never, yeah, it was. And so I'm looking at, wait, does he realize he's on camera? Is this, and I tried to mute him and he unmuted himself really quickly. Or I don't know if that a program doing it.
It's crazy.
Oh my God.
Absolutely crazy. 2019, my mom fell, hit her head, and died suddenly. Within 16 hours, she had fallen and she was deceased. She we'd been going through some ups and downs with her health prior to that, so there was a lot going on, but it was a very sudden, unexpected death. While we were dealing with some of her health issues, my one brother, we kind of felt was going to have a hard time dealing with, he would have some regrets for not being there more in my parents' lives. So that was kind of like a feeling that, we had and whatever. I buried my brother and my mother 3 weeks to the day apart. Whether it was a suicide, whether it was an accident, is not really clear. And at the end of the day, I guess it really doesn't make a difference. He's gone, and, but it's one of those things where it wasn't a clear cut, there was no note, there was no, any of those things. And, the day, I'm the oldest of 4. I have 3 younger brothers. The youngest is the one who is no longer with us. And, that the day that it happened, and I live in South Carolina, my parents are here, and my one brother was here as well. My 2 other brothers one's in Connecticut, one's in New York. And I remember being on the phone with my brother who lives in Connecticut, who's a police officer. And he said, if anybody had said to me, which of your siblings would ever be, you would ever suspect might, hurt themselves, he said he would have been the last one on the list. And that's the thing, it just, I have one of my other brothers has been hospitalized and diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and in and out and on and off meds and all those kinds of things and whatever. So that's almost where you expect, God forbid, that there's going to be more of an issue, it's just one of those, it's so hard to kind of wrap your head around. And my niece and nephew were 9 and 11 at the time, and this happened at the house, and that's where I just have such a hard time wrapping my brain around it being intentional, and see it more likely that it was accidental. It was a gunshot, and it was not a clear cut, gun in to the head or in the mouth or whatever. It was a gunshot wound to the chest. And, that's an unusual kind of suicide normally. Or what's normal, and, my brother and sister-in-law had been on The Amazing Race a couple of years ago, and were kind of pretty well known in the community. And they were they were the dentists on The Amazing Race in the 25th season. They were both local dentists and worked together, and, very well known in the community, very successful, and, all those kinds of things. And the initial story was, he had a heart attack, and, all the stories are out there and everything. And then there's the stigma, and what do people think, and all these kinds of things. And and I worry the most about my niece and nephew, because my sister-in-law has also cut them off from the entire family. So there's just such a series of different pieces and multiple levels and multiple loss. And 2019 was definitely not one of my top 10 years. And I'm just not even really sure. I feel that there's a reason that this is in my lap, and that I'm supposed to be doing more for someone, or, I've done some grief groups and have definitely, navigated and worked through a lot of stuff. And, 2020 was 2020 for everybody. But, now that things are starting to kind of get back to quote unquote normal, whatever that is now, I just feel like I am supposed to do something with this.
Thank you, Eve, for sharing. Al, do you want to start?
Yeah, appreciate you taking the time to share that. What I take away is there are so many unknowns, and it is such a messy situation with family, isn't it? Family in itself is the most complex system out there, and there's so many moving parts. Here's what I've learned more than anything else. It is up to me to create my own happiness. It is up to me to create my own peace. I think that for myself, Eve, I used to always look outside of self. I need to know this. I need to know this. I need to have this person in my life. And I think what I'm learning is just to strengthen the relationship that I have with myself. And when you're saying, I feel as though this happened for a reason, well, that resonates with my belief system, and you're not quite sure what to do about it. I get that too. I also feel as though we have to ask. I'm not sure what your belief system is, but I feel as though our team, our guides, whatever you call them, angels, creator, God, they're always there. But I think sometimes we have to ask. And then this is the key. I've learned to be quiet because my head is so freaking loud. And I like to go, 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 go. I'm trying to learn how to be still and how to be silent. And what is so interesting is that it is that in those moments that I'm starting to get some answers. I trust 100% Eve for you. You will get the answers that you need. And what I love, what I also take away is the fact that you're somebody who doesn't just sit, bitch, complain, but you actively seek out help and you put a voice to your pain. You reach out for, you're an active participant in groups like the grief support. Those are the things that for me, listening, I'm like, should be all right. Should be all right.
Thank you.
Yeah, Eve, to echo Al, thank you for sharing. And I really want to acknowledge your proactivity and seeking guidance and healing. My fourth grade teacher was named Mr. Sutherland. And Mr. Sutherland had in class this unique rare coin collection that he'd been collecting for a number of years. And it was one of these things he kept in class for when students did well on a test or they behaved well, he would let people sit and examine the coins while everybody else had to do schoolwork. And nobody ever knew why he had those coins. And one day he told us a story. He was teaching his class and he got a phone call that his house was on fire. So he takes off out of class, leaves the students unattended, and jumps in his car and is driving 100 miles an hour down the freeway. Now you can imagine a car going 100 miles down the freeway or hearing a story about a student abandoning the classroom, leaving their students unattended, especially fourth graders. There's going to be lots of stuff that's going to be said. People are going to have their judgments. They're going to say lots of things. They're going to have lots of opinions, right? Because everybody's an expert on their opinion. He's being reckless. He's being irresponsible. He's not taking into consideration anybody else. But when you actually heard his version of the story, he wasn't thinking about anyone else or anything else. He was thinking about getting home to try to save his wife and his dogs. And he arrived home, his wife was safe, his dogs were safe, and he got there just in time to see the frame of his home burn to the ground. When the firefighters gave him the okay, that it was okay to start to sift through the rubble, one of the few things that Mr. Sutherland was able to salvage from his home was that collection of coins. People are going to say a lot of stuff. You know, what is the expression like opinions? They're like, you know what, everybody has one. And oftentimes in this day and age, and especially when we have social media and media in general likes to highlight the worst of humanity, there are going to be an unlimited amount of opinions. And there's going to be what you choose to believe. I heard you say over and over again, you feel like you're supposed to do something with this, and that he has a daughter and a son. I can imagine for them that is going to be so helpful during their time of healing and going through life. Is in a world where everybody has lots of opinions and everybody's dealing with partial facts or half truths or maybe just made up BS that goes through the grapevine. The most important guiding light is going to be one of their aunt that is so congruent in her beliefs about who her brother was and who he can still be. Gabe was the exact opposite of your brother. His was very clearly a suicide, and he left 4 letters. He left one to his mom, one to his cousin, who was his best friend, one to his girlfriend who had just broken up with him, and then one to the rest of his friends. Each of the letters had a completely different tone. To the one to his mom, it was apologetic. To the one to his best friend, it was a quotation of one of their favorite movies and talking about wasted talent, and he felt like he'd been wasting his talent his whole life. To his girlfriend, it was a plea. This is my choice, it has nothing to do with you. I loved you. And to his friends, it was him going out on top. It was a declaration about life and how he wants to go on top and he doesn't think life's going to get any better. And even though each of those 4 letters had completely different tones, there was a clear theme in all of them, and that theme was love. So us who were left there, we had choices to make. do we focus on how he died, or do we focus on how he lived? Do we focus on what he was going through in his darkest moments, or do we focus on a greater truth that even in his darkest moments, while he may have communicated it differently to each of us, the communication was clear that he loved each of us very deeply. And that's often the stuff, Eve, that, forgive it, but it's often the stuff that gets lost in the opinions and the bullshit that people start to pass around the water cooler. We get to be busybodies, and we want to make humans, we're meaning makers. We want to make meaning that makes sense to us. And it's a very selfish endeavor, just the same as when we see someone speeding down the freeway at 100 miles an hour or 100 kilometers an hour to the Canadians in the group. We want to make that person into a jerk, an asshole, an inconsiderate person who has no regard for anybody else. Very rarely do we pause to consider that maybe that person just found out that their house was on fire, and they're desperately racing home, trying to salvage their remaining possessions, or maybe save their wife, their family, and their dogs. The hardest thing, I think, for us as survivors is we have to make a decision at some point to decide what meaning we want to make of this. And ultimately, then again, it goes to legacy. Of what legacy is your brother going to have in your life? That legacy could be an eternity of trying to make sense, of trying to rationalize, trying to sort through the opinions and the thoughts and everything else. Or it could also be an eternity of going into what you know to be true. And only you know that. And from what this brief little bit you shared of your brother, of whether it was accidental or intentional, it sounds like what was compelling him in those 3 weeks or so after your mom passed was a little boy who was so driven by the love of his mom. And people on the outside who fail to connect with love, it's easy for us to judge them. And I think that for me, at least, I try to have empathy for them, that they're so distracted by their own stories and their own opinions that they miss the love story in all of this. So I don't know if any of that resonates with you, but that's what came up for me when you shared the story of your brother.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. One thing that I have been doing over the course of the past 2 years has been, I've continued to reach out to my niece and nephew, even though I'm not getting anything back. I've sent, birthday cards and Christmas cards and Halloween cards and whatever. And in addition to that, I've also been keeping notes and a journal for them. Because I think at some point they will come back around to the family with questions, or maybe they won't. But, I'm writing stories, things that they wouldn't know, things that, about him that they might, stories that they would never get from their mom. And, there's just so many different broken pieces of the family dynamic. But, the random days that, I just thought of you because I saw this, and that's what made me think of you. And, I love you, and, I miss whatever, but I've got a journal going that hopefully maybe someday they'll get, and it'll mean something to them, that even though whatever the story was of why Aunt Eve isn't in their life anymore, that she always wanted to be and is, even if they don't know that I am.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it's kind of my way of trying to do something for my brother.
And I would remove the word try. You are. And I'll just share this last piece real quick, and then we'll move over to Audrey's question. My best friend was killed in a car crash 8 years ago. And since that time, I have messaged his daughter, every few months. Love you. I'm thinking of you. She doesn't always respond. To the truth be told, in the last 8 years, she's responded a small number of times compared to the number of times I message her. And it's not for her to respond, it's just for me to love
Right.
and trust in that. And so here we are 8 years later, and she has just started to reach out to people again. And there's some people in that whole circle who are struggling to maintain those connections. I told them, just, keep sending love out there, give her time. She's
Right.
going through a different experience than all of us are. And one of those folks has started to reconnect with her now that she's opening back up, and it's such a beautiful part of their life. And most of us, if we said, hey, it's going to take 8 years to get there, we would say, oh my God, 8 years. No way. And I don't say that to say it's going to take 8 years. I say it to say, trust in what you're doing and eliminate the word try, because you are.
Mm.
And give yourself a big hug that you're doing that for them and for you and for your brother, because it's a beautiful loving act that you're doing.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Al, I'm going to read Audrey's question to you, and I'll let you kick it off, and then we'll start to wrap things up, because I know we're a little over time and we don't want to keep everybody up too late. I felt so much guilt after the loss of my niece. I really didn't appreciate her or realize the struggle she was having or the pain she was feeling. How can I deal with the guilt?
I appreciate the question, Audrey, and I apologize. I think before I said nephew and not niece. The common thread is, I would believe that every person who's lost someone to suicide has that guilt. Guilt is, in my opinion, probably the most useless emotion that exists. It does not serve us well. It eats away at us. It prevents us from leading a life of peace. I felt it. It was the coulda, shoulda, woulda, head on a swivel. And then you arrive at a place where it's as simple as this. When you know better, you do better. So I took certain tools away from that loss with Justin. And now when I feel, because the number one sign, I believe, is intuition, guts. If you think that there's a problem, there probably is. I've taken that with me. And in any situation, if I ever feel as though that person may be at that same place, then I now feel as though I can and I will have that conversation. I now understand my place. I understand my role. I understand that I have my journey. I also understand and believe, Audrey, well, I believe, not I understand, I believe that your niece is present. I believe that Gabe is present. I believe, everybody who has passed, there's a great line that says, it's not that you have a soul, it's that you are a soul. I communicate constantly to Justin. I think that the communication piece helps alleviate guilt. Your niece is always there. Have those conversations. If you need to say sorry, say sorry. Give yourself permission to feel. If you need to cry, cry. But the difference is, try not to be consumed, because I was consumed. You can write on a piece of paper. I did this. I wrote what I wanted to say to Justin. And when you talk to survivors, that's something that resonates with a lot of them. Put a note in a balloon and send it up. Whatever feels right, do. But I also don't think that your niece would want you to feel that way. I mean, if I had died by suicide, there is no way I would want my loved ones to be left with, right? Why do we do this to ourselves? We deserve peace.
Thanks, Al. I think I love to the exercises, the one of sitting it up in the balloon. It's so powerful with that. And you're absolutely correct. Those who we've lost would never want us to be left and become obsessive over the emotions like guilt and grief and despair and depression after they've passed. It really comes back to that notion of honoring them. Guilt is an interesting emotion. It's kind of oftentimes, unfortunately, it's as synergistic to grief as sprinkles are on a sundae. And it comes up because we have some sort of core belief that there was a time in the past that we could have made a better choice. And we start to have this obsession in our mind that if only we could have gone back and made a different choice, the outcome would have been different, as if we have that godlike ability to determine someone else's destiny. But you think about it, when it comes back, what happens and where that becomes such a fable is because we're telling a very biased side of the story, that if we were to go back in time and we had the information we had, we would make the perfect new choice. You're completely neglecting what the other person's experience is and all the other variables that go into humanity. The other interesting piece with guilt, and especially when it comes associated to grief, is we will often keep guilt around as almost like a penance to pay. And we start to use it in some sort of way of a way to quantify our love. Because when we feel guilty, we feel that we were not acting out of love, that we didn't see something, we didn't hear something, we didn't recognize something. If we didn't, that means we didn't love them as fully as we could have, or we should have. If only we'd have loved them more, we would have been able to save them. And so we start to use guilt as a way of penance. It's like our daily lashes we apply to ourselves, and it's something that we have to do because we didn't do it for them when they were here in life, and so we now would do it in death. We'll pay that penance for an unspecified and undetermined amount of time, and then maybe one day it fades away. And the other thing with guilt is we'll often use it as a way to quantify our love, right? The more pain I feel, it just means the more I love, because so many of us will struggle in the presence of guilt, because when we're focusing on guilt, what we're not focusing on is love. So guilt takes this emotional space in when we are having love as big a presence, right? Because we can only feel one thing at once, right? It's guilt or love. It's sadness or happiness. It's mad or angry. You know, the funniest thing I think is when you've ever been in an argument with your partner or a friend, and you're really pissed off, and you guys are just going at it, and then something happens, and you start laughing, or maybe they start laughing, and you're trying to hold on to that anger, right? But you really can't. And so then it's kind of making you even more mad because they're laughing, and now you're starting to laugh, but you really want to be angry, and you're so committed to being angry, but the laughter starts to take over, and pretty soon you're both laughing, and then you can't even remember what the heck you were upset about to begin with, right? Because we can't hold both emotions at once. We're one or the other. And when we're using guilt as a penance, or we're using guilt as a way to quantify our love, you know, with the idea the more pain I feel means it's just a token, a measurement of more I love. It's not true. It's a lie. Guilt is guilt. Love is love. Grief is grief. Love is love. So what I would encourage you to consider, Audrey, is this. As much as it would be beautiful that we had the ability to go back in time, give yourself permission to acknowledge who you were and where you were at that time in your life. That you truly, with all your heart, probably made the best choices you did with the information you had, as limited as it was, just as we all did, just as Al did with Justin, just as I did, just as Linda's doing right now with the people in her life, just as Eve did with her brother, just as Cheryl has, and just as you, all of us, we've all made the best decisions, the best choices we could at that time. And there's probably going to be times in the near future where we'll all be faced with choices again. Sometimes we'll do better and sometimes we won't. That is one of the hard things about being human, is we will not always choose perfectly because we don't know what the future is going to be. And even if we did know what the future is going to be, we still would probably screw up some of our choices. It's just our nature. You know, we can have the best information possible. It's like, you know, we've all been in there before where we're driving the car with someone. They say, hey, if you take this exit, you'll get there 5 minutes faster. But no. I know the way. Of course, we get there 5 minutes late. We had better information, but we still made a poor choice. And I think the other piece of this is then really coming back to, if we're not going to make your niece's passing a penance or your penalty or your punishment for herself, it's getting back to what Al was saying about knowing in your heart that's not how she would want you to live. It's about you allowing yourself to take a breath and take a break from the guilt and really check in and ask not of self, but ask of her. I do this all the time. I'll ask my loved ones out loud or silently, how would you want me to live? How would you want me to experience this very moment? And start small with the moment. And whatever shows up for you, trust in that feeling. Going back to what Al was saying, it's trusting the gut, trusting that intuition, because if this feeling is strong enough, it's probably true. And allowing her to truly serve as your guide, not the guilt-ridden hallucination of her, because the emotion is real, but it's also obscuring us from a bigger truth. And that truth is that your and her relationship was not a relationship that was built on love, or built on guilt, rather. It was a relationship that was built on love. Most of us do not maintain relationships with people we feel guilty about. Most of us actively seek nurturing the relationships we feel love for. And just as you had a relationship built on love and life, so too can you have a relationship built on love in this phase of life. But it's going to come from you allowing yourself to release yourself from that guilt, to accept that you probably made the best decision you could at that time with what you had, and to really go deep in your heart and connect with your niece and allowing her to guide you in living in each moment in the way you know she would want you to live. And I apologize, I kind of have a campfire look going here. I just realized, oops, did I just lose you? I have a campfire look going here because the lighting, I didn't account for going past 7 and forgot to turn a light on.
You look good, my friend.
Yeah.
I really appreciate those words, and I appreciate you posing the question, Audrey. Jesse, that was like poetry in motion, man. That needs to be a book.
It's the lighting, Al. It's the lighting. It adds to the storyteller thing. You can go down here if you want to tell a scary story. You can go over here if you want to tell an uplifting story, and you can go up here if you want to tell an enlightened story. It's all in angles.
Wow.
Can I say one thing about what you just told Audrey? The love. Whenever I feel guilty about the person who committed suicide in my life, I was told to forgive myself. And this is so hard. But what you're saying is so much easier to go towards love, because we feel guilty. We didn't do something. Like we feel we should have done something. But going towards love I think that's the answer. Wow. I needed to hear that.
Good. Yeah, it keeps it clean. It's the one truth. If we really stop and we get out of our stories and all the other confusing emotions or the opinions of others or all that stuff, and that's not to dismiss the validity of those feelings. It's very important that we acknowledge feelings when they come up. But we also have, part of us has to acknowledge and accept how we are creating those emotions. We become willing storytellers in it. And many of us we will all be much harsher on ourselves than anything anyone else says. And what ends up happening with that is when we get away from the story and we get to the one truth, and the one universal truth in all of this is love. It really, really is. It's the thing that we will do the crazy, crazy stuff for in life. We do the crazy stuff for our loved ones when people say, well, why the hell would you do that? Well, I love them. Right? It's the things we watch the movies for. We want to see the broad acts or whatever it is, or the beautiful things. And it really does come down to that. And it was about that when they were physically here. And it's about that in this new phase of life where they may not be physically present, but just the same as when you may have been on one part of town and they were on the other part of town and you weren't physically present, you didn't stop loving them, nor did they stop loving you. Emotion was still there. And what we do is when we lose someone, there's really 3 losses. There's the physical loss. There's the loss of how our identity of them physically present in our life. And then it's our perceived loss of the emotion. And I would argue for most of us, the one that is so hard, we think it's the physical loss, but it's really the perception of the emotional loss. But the emotion is still available. We've just made it elusive because we've become so obsessive over guilt and grief and shame and all those other things. But exactly, Linda, as you beautifully said, it really is about love.
100%. 100%. Love is everything. It is everything. It makes this world a much brighter place. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing in that. Again, I want to be respectful of time. I know we're a little bit over, but it's so cool that we can come together to have these conversations. So we also don't want to just leave you hanging. If you need to reach out, then please do so. Personally, info@alankaler.com is probably the best email address to send to. I had a lot of people in my life who just said, if you ever need to talk, you can unload here. And I did. And so, personally, I extend that to you. If we can be of assistance moving forward, then please connect.
Yeah. And you can find me on social media, email, everything. It's Jesse Brisendine. I have an event actually on Sunday. Some of you may be interested in every year on September 12th. I do a fundraiser called Sunrise Sunset Day. And it's a day for people from all over the world to pause, take a moment, and share a photo of the sunrise or sunset from wherever they are in the world. Doesn't matter if it's a perfect sunrise, it might be rainy, snowy, wherever it is. But the point and the intention is about being present to a loved one or loved ones you've lost. And then I encourage people to either make a financial donation to a nonprofit organization, honor them, or to perform an act of kindness to them. So some of you might be interested in that. I also did a TED Talk around this topic called Grief is Not a Life Sentence, if you want to watch that. And again, yeah, both Al and I have open doors, open hearts. Please reach out if there's anything else we can do to support you. And thank you to each of you who have been here to share this time, to hold the space. It's a lot to ask people to come and talk about suicide. It's probably even more to ask people to do it on a Friday night. So it's a privilege to share, and I have so much love in my heart for each of you. And Al, I consider you such a dear friend, and I love you, man. And I'm so grateful to have shared this time with you this evening.
Thank you. Thanks, Jesse. Love you too. Yeah, truly, I echo everything that Jesse said. Much respect. Thank you. Take good care of yourselves. Keep loving. Be well.
Bye, everybody.
Bye now.